We have 30 of them. And you can see on this map that there are in West Tennessee and East Tennessee and along the Upper Cumberland Plateau generally. So we had 30 compared to 8 the last decade. And on the flip side of that, we've had 17 counties that are growing above 10%. And most of those counties are around Middle Tennessee. And just another way to look at it, this is a county growth table from 2010 to 2020, and it just highlights. It's the top 5 and bottom 5 growers and ones that didn't grow. And that change goes from 47.59% up for Trousdale to a negative 10.56% for Lake County. You'll notice that the top 5 are all Middle Tennessee and the low 5 are all West Tennessee. So a little bit about where we are. So in 1990, the ideal House district size for state House districts was 49,264. And you can see as the decades have gone by that we're now at 69,806. So in 30 years, the House districts have gone up about 20,000 folks. And from the state total of 6,910,840, we also then know the ideal populations for the different types of districts. Congressional ideal, 767,871. And then the Senate ideal population of 209,419. And I have a range there, and I'll get back to that in a second. The Tennessee House ideal population is 69,806, again with a 10% range. For those of you who have been through this before, and many of us have talked to, the congressional ideal population is the ideal. We're going to be plus or minus 0 people if we can. Maybe there'll be 1 or 2 people difference, but we try to get down to the exact number. When it comes to state legislative districts, as the one person, one vote principle has been determined, there's a range. And there is a 10% principle. It's not really a rule, and it needs to be justified. And what's the reason that you have that? And it's not exactly +5 and minus 5%. It can be a variation. That could be +6, -4. In our case, what drives the deviation is our state constitution. Our state constitution in Article 2, Section 5 wants us to keep every county whole. And by doing that and by keeping county wholes, we wind up with a range that we try to stay within. And that will be under 10%. And finally, about the census data, this is a 2010 to 2020 malapportionment table. It just shows you some highlights. The districts that are the top 5, the most population after the census on their current boundaries, and then the districts at the 5 lowest populated district after the 2020 census. Again, notice that the 5 with the most population are all Middle Tennessee districts, and the 5 on the low end are all West Tennessee districts or in Shelby County in West Tennessee. Both this malapportionment table, a full malapportionment table, and a full county growth table are on the House Redistricting webpage under Documents. So if you want to see the full list, I encourage folks to go ahead and look there. They're currently there. And this is a good time to say that by the end of the day today, this presentation will also be on the webpage for people to look for under Documents. And then last on this portion of this map shows sort of where representation is moving. The black arrows are showing where representation is moving in Tennessee. And the very colorful central sort of, I don't know what you would call that, star, is drive times around Nashville. And each one of those rings is 15 minutes. And if you remember the map that we looked at where the growth was, it's maybe not surprising that within an hour of Nashville are most of those counties that have grown 10% or more. So just wanted to share that with you. So two things that this committee is charged with is approval of the House redistricting guidelines and also the approval of the submissions of redistricting plans. And we will come back to both of these in a moment after this presentation so that you can talk about them specifically. But I just wanted to go over with these with you now as part of this presentation. And the House redistricting guidelines are found currently, and these are the same guidelines that the House has had since 1990s, and they're in 3-1-103B, and it's an intent statement of what our criteria are, and when we go through redistricting of the state house, and I'm going to make that clear. Each district must be represented by a single member. So we have to have 99 districts with one member each. We don't have multi-member districts. Districts shall comply with the constitutional requirements for one person, one vote, as judicially interpreted to apply to state legislative districts, essentially a 10% variance. Geographic features, boundaries, and population figures shall be based on the 2020 decennial census. We use the data that the Census Bureau produces. We don't change the data. We don't redraw lines. We don't split census blocks. We use the data as it's been delivered. Districts must be contiguous, and contiguity, that's a tough one, by water is sufficient. I'm going to come back to talk about this after this next one as well. No more than 30 counties may be split to attach to other counties or parts of counties to form multi-county districts. So Article 2, Section 5 of the Tennessee Constitution tells us, hey, House of Representatives, don't split any counties. The one person, one vote standard says, well, you got to have your district substantially equal in population. And those two things, they conflict. One's federal, one's our state constitution. In 1983, this issue came up in front of the state Supreme Court in the case Lockhart v. Crow. The Supreme Court, in its wisdom, said, all right, House, in order for you to comply with one person, one vote, we know you're going to have to split counties. But we are going to put that limit at 30. You're not going to split more than 30. And you're not going to split at the time the 4 urban counties, but for 2 reasons. So you're limited to 30. The 4 urbans would count if you had to split them for these reasons. The 2 reasons were compliance with the Voting Rights Act, or to take a small portion off to help with a deviation issue in an adjoining district. So those were the 2 reasons they gave us for the urban. What else they told us was, you're not going to split a county more than once. I can't take, I'm going to use Putnam County as the example. I can't take Putnam County, which has enough population for a district and a little bit more. I can't make the district in Putnam County take part of it and move it to Cumberland, the remainder, and take the other part of the remainder and move it to the west, which would be Jackson. Oh, I'm gonna go north. Okay, I'll go north, a little bit north to Jackson County. So we can't divide up the counties and split them in more than one way. Permissible to do it once with a limit of 30, but not to double split any county that you split. Why pause on the previous one about contiguity? I think I did that better this time. So we have, Tennessee is unique, and we have non-contiguous counties. There are several of these counties, and it is important that if you redistrict, that the counties stay whole. So when Loudoun County is put into a district, it has 2 land islands. There are actual small parts of Loudoun County that are separated by land in adjoining counties. They also have, Loudoun County, a place where there's a point contiguity. We would not redistrict that way. That's not permissible. It's not been our practice to do it by point. But for Loudoun County, that's perfectly permissible because that's the county boundary. So that's one of the unique county features of Tennessee. There's more. There's a portion of Dixon County and Cheatham County. There's a portion of Davidson County and Wilson County, and there's a portion of White County that is in, well, I'll have to think about that, but it's below White County. So those are they're what I refer to as land islands, and as far as I know, there are no other places that have these. Other states that have counties like this. But when we redistrict by counties, that's a whole county. regardless of its contiguity. Just wanted to make sure that that was clear. And finally, the redistricting plan will comply with the Voting Rights Act and constitutions of Tennessee and the United States. This is the order that they appear in the statute. There is no particular order. We comply with all of these, but these are the guidelines that the House has had. And then just turning to submission of redistricting plans. And again, this is similar to what we have done in past redistricting cycles. I tried to just clean it up a little bit to make it a little less wordy. So I'll just go through this with y'all. Plans may only be submitted by members of the House of Representatives. Outside plans submitted through members of the House of Representatives shall be delivered to the Select Committee on Redistricting by 12 o'clock noon Central Standard Time on Friday, November 12th, 2021 to determine compliance with submission guidelines. So the House, just like a bill or amendment or a resolution or a proclamation, only members of the General Assembly can introduce those types of documents. And that's the same here. But what we do is we allow outside groups to work through a legislator, and it doesn't have to be their legislator. It can be any legislator. 10 years ago, Congressman Cooper introduced 2 plans through his state representative, Speaker Harwell, to be considered by the committee that we had 10 years ago. And this proposal would give folks a couple additional weeks to turn them into us. Last time it was November 1st, move it back to November 12th. We have to have them early enough. It's hard to determine how many we'll receive, but we have to look through them to determine the compliance with the guidelines that we just went over. And what I do is produce a report for you that just factually says this plan has a deviation of X, it splits this many counties, and so on. So moving on, outside plans submitted must comply with the following. Plans must use the same population figures and geographic division used by the House of Representatives for redistricting. So anybody that wants to do this on the outside needs to use the data from for the 2020 census from the U.S. Census Bureau. Plans must be submitted for the state as a whole with the requisite number of contiguous single-member districts for the type of plan submitted. If you're submitting a congressional plan, it's 9 districts. If you're submitting the House plan, it's 99. If it's the state Senate, it's 33. You have to do the whole plan. Plans must comply with the Voting Rights Act and the constitutions of Tennessee and the United States. Plans must be submitted in electronic format, which is prepared using either Maptitude for Redistricting or an electronic format, which can be imported using Maptitude for Redistricting. So the State House is using a software called Maptitude for Redistricting. It's the same software we've used since the late 1990s. Other commercial programs, easy enough to import them into this. And then there's a lot of free sites, Dave's Redistricting, and also District Builder, which is really, they have really improved over the last 10 years. And you can redistrict on the internet through these sites down to the census block level and export those. And so folks can use those and make sure they send that to us with, and this is a should, be accompanied with a report containing, at a minimum, the total population of each district, the relative deviation from the ideal population of each district expressed as a percentage, and the total overall range of the plan as a whole. And it's just important for us that when we're importing, that we have an idea if there's something gone wrong. We can see that, well, wait a second, District 1's supposed to have 66,500, but I'm showing it has 66,900. So it's important that there is a report, but it's a should. If people don't do that, some of the sites may not be able to produce exactly that, but I think it's easy enough to figure out some of that information. So the more they can, the better it is to make sure that we get correctly into our system. And then just wanted to touch on the redistricting legislation. The bills for the State House, State Senate, and Congress have already been filed. They are in the Public Service Subcommittee of State Government. And Speaker Johnson and Speaker Marsh share the sponsorship of those pieces of legislation. And what happens is 3-1-103 is where the redistricting plan winds up. It's when it turns into language. So we take a map. This is your current districts. And what we do with that map is we put it we do a report. And as you'll see, District 1, Sullivan County. And the report will show each district. If it's a whole county, it will list the county. If the VTD, which is a voting tabulation district, what we know as precincts, it will tell us what full precincts are within that county. And if the precinct is split, then you'll look down there, Hickory Tree Fire Hall was split last time, and you see the census blocks. So that's what the legislation looks like. And then just finally, a little redistricting timetable. Session convenes January 11th. The qualifying deadline is April 7th. And I just wanted to give you an idea what 90 days, 60 days, and 30 days out from that is. Of course, it's important to do this early on to give citizens notice, to help the election commissions in the counties know where people are going to vote. And then this plan will be in place for the next primary and general election. And then finally, just when the 2010 plan and 2000 plans were enacted, you can see in January, early January in 2002, and then in later January in 2010. Here's just a little contact information for folks if they want to get in touch with Speaker Johnson or myself. Also, the webpage of the committee at the bottom. And as I mentioned, this document will be on the webpage of the committee by the end of the day. And so that completes this part of the presentation, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Himes. Do we have any questions? Leader Camper.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Chairman and Speaker, for putting together this committee. Appreciate the opportunity to have an open process, give the community opportunity to understand the process, and I think this is good. I do have a question, Mr. Himes. At any point in the process of putting the maps together, are we planning to use any outside counsel or vendors to help in this process at all?
Leader Camper, I can tell you that I'm not planning on doing that. But that's up to you all to decide how you're going to work through this process as we go. The House has traditionally just used the House nonpartisan House staff to work on redistricting.
Thank you for
Leader.
Thank you for that. I thought I heard you earlier talk about a vendor, so I was just curious about vendors, outside counsel. Was that considered a vendor? That's why I asked that question. Yes.
Leader Camper, so we use a software called Maptitude for Redistricting, which is developed by Caliper Corporation. That's what the House has used since the late 1990s for redistricting. So, I guess that just provides what they do is they take the raw census data and put it into a program that makes it usable for somebody like me that doesn't have very good technical skills to be able to work on redistricting.
Leader.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for that answer. That was my question, Mr. Chair.
Representative Parkinson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Speaker, and thank you, Mr. Himes. I appreciate you being here and all of your expertise on this. Also, based on your preliminary analysis of the population data, are there any areas where you believe the Voting Rights Act may require the creation of new opportunity districts for minority voters?
So, in redistricting, one thing this House has done is always comply with the Voting Rights Act. It's been one of our criteria since the 1990s. And when it comes to the Voting Rights Act and when it comes to redistricting, race can't predominate the development of a plan. But you have to think about it and you have to look at it as long as it doesn't predominate. And what you don't want to do is retrogress in areas where majority districts can be maintained or created. I'll say that I've looked a little at the districts that we currently have to see there's been some huge demographic shifts in parts of the state, particularly here in Nashville and a little bit so in Chattanooga. I've looked a little bit at those areas of the state. We have a growing Hispanic population in Tennessee. And it appears that population continues to be diverse. And in areas where it's strongest it's very mixed. There's census blocks. For example, there's census blocks, there's precincts in sort of southwest Memphis that are 80, 90% African American. There are no precincts that are Hispanic that get to that level. But it's something that I'm mindful of, and definitely will continue to look at the longer that we have this data and as we go through this process.
Representative Parkinson.
Thank you, sir. And that's a perfect segue to my follow-up. And based on the same analysis, are there any areas where minority voters may not make up a majority of the population, but have 40% or more, which would potentially give them the opportunity to elect representatives of their choice?
So the Voting Rights Act requires us, the Voting Rights Act is, we're looking at minority majority districts, which at the minimum are a district that's 50% plus one person, whatever voting age, whatever the racial or ethnic group might be. So when it comes to opportunity and opportunity districts, you may recall, you were here, that last redistricting cycle, that an area in Nashville, Antioch area in Nashville, appeared to have and wound up close to what I would think of as a minority opportunity district, where it was a combination of African American voting age population and Hispanic voting age population, and it was the majority of the district. So there are areas like that that are not a majority minority district, but are areas where there are different minority groups that are significant in population. But I don't know if you necessarily know if all the folks that live there, if the different groups vote the same way. That would be part of the analysis that you'd look at to see if it was effective. And effective for who? Is it effective for the 30% Hispanic voter population or the 30% African American? You'd have to judge that.
Thank you, Mr. Himes. Thank you, Mr. Chair, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Any other questions? All right. We need to approve a House redistricting guidelines. So, Mr. Himes, would you explain the guidelines?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, thank you. So we talked a little bit in the presentation about the guidelines. I put that slide back up. It's also on the dashboard. If you want to see it closer up in front of you, it's the same information on the dashboard program under House Redistricting Guidelines. These are the guidelines that are sort of our criteria, our intent when we do state house redistricting. They have been the guidelines since the 1990 cycle, and this is the guidelines that we have. And I'd be happy to answer any questions about the guidelines.
Representative Williams?
Chairman, I'll make a motion to adopt the same rules that the committee adopted in the last redistricting based upon Mr. Himes' discussion.
Second. We have a motion and a second. Any objection? All right, we'll be voting on the House redistricting guidelines. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Approved. Next, submission of redistricting plans. Mr. Himes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I've gone advanced to the slide. There's two slides that have the submission information. And both of these, if this is approved by the committee, both of these documents will be on the website or the web page of the committee by the end of the day today so that everybody can see them. But the submission of redistricting plans, again, these are the same submission guidelines that we used in previous cycles with a few provisos. One, we've given 2 more weeks for folks to submit a plan through a member, and I think we've simplified these requirements on the second page to make it a little bit more understandable. I think there were maybe 9 last time, and it's easier to boil it down to these 5. And also on the 5th one, again, I recommend that folks give us a detailed report, but we wouldn't hold people to that. We've customarily worked with organizations when they have submitted, if there's issues, with trying to make sure that we can get it into the system and be able to evaluate it. So these are the submission guidelines, and again, this is similar to what we've had in the past.
I have a, let's see, we've got a motion and a second. Representative Freeman.
Thank you. The only comment I would have is number 2 seems to be potentially a little cumbersome for individuals from a community. If they know their community and would like to submit a plan for their own district, it would make sense to me that we would maybe accept that and then incorporate it into a plan potentially. I can't imagine a group of people from, say, Davidson County having a real ability to have an impact in somebody on another edge of the state, and to have the ability to have the research done and to know the communities of interest. And so I'm curious if there's a way that we could allow for single districts to be submitted. Thank you.
Mr. Himes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Representative Freeman. So we have, these are the same submission guidelines we've had in previous cycles. And the importance of a whole state requirement is if somebody, again, if you don't mind me using Putnam County, Representative Williams, if somebody does district for Putnam County, it doesn't necessarily help us in the sense, one, we can't evaluate it. It's a single district, or at the most a district and a half. And 2, it won't necessarily fit in a plan. There's decisions that have to be made even in the counties that remain whole. An example of that is as a county, a multi-district county that could have, say, 9 or 10 districts in it. That decision's significant, and it affects how the rest of the districts are drawn. So that's the reason that we've had this requirement in for the last 20 years.
Representative Williams.
Thank you, Speaker Johnson. Mr. Himes, thank you for including Putnam County in all your discussions today. But I did have a clarification. Speaker Sexton's predecessor and Speaker Sexton have been reticent about a number of bills that were limited as it relates to carrying bills. My question would be, as it relates to House plans, are the members of this committee in the rules limited to the number of plans they could submit? So, for instance, could Representative Freeman, if he had a plethora of ideas, could he submit 15 statewide plans, or is he limited to the number that he can submit?
So the Representative Williams, so these aren't bills; these are concepts. They're plans, and we can get 100, we get 1,000, or we could get 3. The limitation is just on the resources that you have, myself and some good folks from legal services that are helping me on drafting plans. And if we get them from the outside, then it's all about getting them into our system and then evaluating them. But there's not a limitation on the number that can be submitted. But each one of them then turns into an amendment. And that's why it's important for them to have sort of a sponsor. So if it's an outside plan, somebody, a member, will be the sponsor of it, and if it moves through this committee and on to the regular full committee, standing committee process, when it gets to public service, it's going to have to change into the language that I showed you with the counties, the VTDs, and the census blocks. So each one of those is an amendment, and then it becomes more like a bill. Less of a map, more about the language.
Representative Williams.
I guess that's to the point I was trying to make. If a member has a plethora of bills they're wanting to file, using this as an example, they have to be selective as to which bills they're going to file during that half of the session. Likewise, if I were to bring you 1,000 plans, it would be very difficult for us to prioritize which of those 1,000. And if every member did that, you're talking about 1,200, was that 120,000 plans? I mean, I guess the thought was and I recognize we have a deadline. I just didn't know if there was a need to have a limit on the number so that the member in an amendment form to those bills should limit the number that they're submitting. Because the outside groups have to get one of us on this committee to file it.
Mr. Himes.
So yeah.
Mr. Himes.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Williams. So in the past, we've allowed people to submit outside plans, and we've been able to handle that with the deadline that we had and the staff that we had. And my hope would be that we get some very thoughtful plans. It's anyone's guess what that number will be. In the past, it hasn't been unmanageable.
Leader Camper.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Doug, with respect to those plans that are submitted, will the members of this committee have access to those plans? What's been traditional in that sense?
Mr. Himes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Leader Camper. So what we've done in the past, I can use 10 years ago as an example. We had 5 plans submitted from the outside through 2 different members. And I evaluated those plans, kind of a factual evaluation of how many counties, like I said, what's the deviation. And then that analysis was available to the committee. And I can't recall if we had a picture of them last time. Our technology keeps getting better. I don't think we projected them, but we definitely had visual aids. And then we had the proponents of those, not only the legislator who was the quote unquote sponsor, but we also had the proponents of those plans in attendance at the meeting where they were discussed, and were able to offer comments at that time.
Leader Camper.
Thank you. Also, if a organization submit early enough, let's say they submit it next week before the November deadline, is there an opportunity for them, if you give them feedback, to make changes, corrections, and resubmit it as long as it's before that deadline?
Mr. Himes.
Leader Camper, yes, I was able to work last time. There was an organization out of North Carolina that one of the members was the sponsor of plans, and I worked with them to help them correct some of the deficiencies when it came to county splitting. And they gave them enough time, if they did early enough, to where I could say, you've got to. I know you're not from here. You need to read the Lockhart case. You got to understand the county splitting provisions that we have. So there is an opportunity, and to just not give legal advice, but to maybe point out some early deficiencies that you can see if folks want that. Some may not.
Thank you, Mr. Himes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Leader. All right, we need to adopt the submission of redistricting plans. We have a motion and a second. Any objection? All in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? It's It's adopted. Next, we have public comments. Mr. Himes, have we had any requests for public comments?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, thank you. We actually had 11 individuals asked to provide public comments to the committee by yesterday at 1 o'clock. Two of those individuals have, one is not able to be in Nashville. The other one was not able to attend the meeting. So we have 9 folks that are still on the list and hopefully are here today. I have that list and am happy to
All right. So we have 9. We will limit the speakers to 3 minutes apiece. Would you call up the first
Yes,
speaker?
yes, Mr. Speaker. The first speaker on my list is Congressman Jim Cooper.
Welcome, Congressman.
Thank you, Speaker Johnson. Thank you, Vice Chairman Marsh. Thank you, I guess in Congress we call it Ranking Member Camper. Thanks to each member of this distinguished committee. I would ask unanimous consent to submit my written statement for the record.
We will do that.
Thank you. I'm reminded of a former Tennessee legislator, Tommy Burnett of Fentress County, someone of some renown, who is alleged to have said that there are 2 things you don't mess with: your wife and your district, and not necessarily in that order. And that gives an idea of the close attachment that every elected official has between their district, which oftentimes they've served for 10 years or longer, and a new district, which may or may not bear any resemblance to the previous district. Because each one of you has invested an incredible amount of time and work to know all of the people that you represent, every nook and cranny of your district, so that you can do a better job of representing them. That's a huge investment that no one wants to see wasted. And that's why in previous redistricting rounds, and I've been through 5, and well, this will be the 5th, and so far I've survived every one. That's why in the past, this has generally been, at least at the congressional level, remarkably bipartisan. The incumbents of either party were polled, at least privately, asked their recommendation, and the general feeling was, let's keep the districts as close to the same as you can, given the constitutional and population requirements. And that's generally what's been done. I hope and pray for Nashville's sake that that's done this time. Because I think there are several arguments, and as you was recited, the state constitution requires you not to split counties unless you really have to. And 30 is the maximum that can be split. Ideally, none would be split. But Nashville has grown to the size where it's almost exactly the right size to be a congressional district. But Nashville should also not be split because it's the state capital. And as y'all know, none of you want your home county split. You would be really criticized by your constituents if it was split without a darn good reason. But Nashville's not only the state capital, it's also the economic engine of the state. And Nashville made that unique and historic decision back in the 60s to go metro, to combine city and county government. So we have a unique bond in our county.
Mr. Congressman,
Yes.
your time is expired.
Sorry, 3 minutes goes faster here. Final point. Nashville is perhaps the hottest destination in America. It's a unique formula. Don't ruin the recipe. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Congressman. Mr. Himes, next speaker.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. Next on the list is Debbie Gould.
Please come forward and for the record, please
Yes.
give us your name.
My name is Debbie Gould. I am the president of the League of Women Voters of Tennessee. We are a nonpartisan volunteer organization that believes that informed and active participation of Tennesseans is critical to maintaining a healthy democracy. However, that can only happen when government operates with transparency and allows opportunities for meaningful public input in the key issues that impact our state. We are appreciative of the fact that this organizational meeting of the Select House Committee for Redistricting is being held today with this opportunity for our voices to be heard. And we urge Chairman Johnson to continue to make all subsequent deliberations of this committee equally accessible to the public. We know that in previous redistricting activities conducted by the Tennessee legislature, only maps that included the political boundaries for the entire state could be submitted for consideration. However, this limitation overlooks the fact that individuals may have very significant insights into the needs of their own communities of interest and can make the case for why their community should be kept together during the redistricting process. After all, who knows the needs of a community better than the people who live there? However, at the same time, these same people may lack insights needed to draw a credible map to be considered for the credible map for the entire state. We know that many other states have allowed for partial maps to be considered early in the process and would encourage this committee to adopt the same level of flexibility. Finally, we would urge the committee to hold regional hearings to review the drafted maps prior to legislative approval. These regional hearings will give members of the public the opportunity to respond to maps that reflect the population changes of the past 10 years and help them determine if their communities of interest will have the voice and the representation they will need for the next 10 years. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Himes, next speaker.
Mr. Speaker, Kendra Lee.
Please give
afternoon.
us your name for the record.
Yes, Kendra Lee, Policy Manager for the Equity Alliance. Council Himes, Speaker, Madam Vice Speaker, I appreciate you all for letting us be here for the moment. I just wanted to echo the sentiments of a lot of the other community partners that we have here across Tennessee about transparency and really about collaboration with the people of Tennessee as your constituencies. You took a vow to do the work on behalf of the people. And when we talk about the plans that have to be submitted on a statewide basis, you can see how it can be a hindrance to the exact people you took an oath to be able to serve. And so we want to strongly ask you to reconsider about being able to have plans that doesn't have to be made on a statewide basis. And so, Council Himes, I understand that this is the way that things have been done, but I can say that the last redistricting process, I was a fan of Coach Calipari, so things change. And so we want to be able to make sure that we are progressing in the right direction. And so I just ask of this committee, I thank you for being here. We thank you for your service, but truly consider making this process transparent, making it collaborative, and making it equitable. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Himes.
Mr. Speaker, Justin Jones.
Is Mr. Jones in the audience? I don't see Mr. Jones.
Mr. Speaker, next on the list would be Mattia Powell.
Welcome.
I want to first of all thank you all. Thank you to Speaker Johnson and each member of the committee for allowing me to speak today. My name is Mattia Powell. I am the Executive Director for Civic Tennessee. It's a nonpartisan state coalition dedicated to increasing civic participation around communities that are historically underrepresented. I'm also a lifelong Tennessean, growing up in rural West Tennessee and Trenton, Tennessee, but spending a better part of my life in Nashville. While these communities are drastically different when it comes to having a say over who represents us, most of us really want similar things. We want a transparent process we can trust, where communities remain whole and where voters have an equal voice. In my work, I often hear from people that their voice and their vote doesn't matter. And when communities are broken up and power is diluted, people are less likely to engage in the process and have the ability to impact policies that affect their communities. So I urge you to really make every attempt to keep counties whole and consider communities victors when drawing districts. Nobody knows communities better than the people who live in them. Including the public in all stages of the map drawing process is key to drawing fair districts. And so I urge you to do a few things, some of which you've already heard today. Host public meetings before the maps are drawn to solicit public input. And truly take in consideration community maps that are submitted by the community when drawing and finalizing maps. Also, I would love for you guys to share the process followed by the General Assembly in conducting open meetings to provide the public with in-person and virtual access to all redistricting committee meetings. And finally, provide timely opportunities for the public to review the draft maps prepared by this committee on redistricting with enough time for recommendations to be incorporated into the process before the maps are finalized. When it comes to democracy, it should be inclusive and fair for everyone. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Mr. Himes?
Mr. Speaker, Jen Foley.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My name is Jen Foley. I'm a resident of Williamson County, a constituent of Mr. Whitson, and a chair of the Williamson County Democratic Party. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with all of you today, and I'm very gladdened that the House Committee is committed to a transparent process that involves public input. As many of you know, as we just saw, Williamson County has experienced exponential growth over the last decade, which has contributed to a 20% shift toward Democrats in the last presidential election. I stand or sit before you as someone representing nearly 50,000 Democrats in Williamson County who feel that our voices are not represented in our state government. We are all very concerned about how redistricting will impact our state legislative districts, and I urge the committee to draw lines in a fair manner that keeps neighborhoods, towns, and city boundaries intact. In Williamson County, our two largest cities, Franklin and Spring Hill, are divided into 3 and 2 House districts, respectively. These current districts divide communities and create confusion for voters. I'm asking you to propose redistricting based on fair and equal representation for all citizens and not political strategy. As the maps are drawn, I urge the committee to share information in a clear and timely manner that allows for plenty of time for public comment. I also hope the committee will encourage representatives to hold town halls in their districts to present the information to their constituents. Thank you for your time and consideration today.
Thank you. Next, Mr. Himes.
Mr. Speaker, Jim Garrett.
Welcome.
Good afternoon. My name is James Garrett. I am chairman of the Davidson County Republican Party. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to the committee. I share Representative Freeman's concerns about Davidson County. It seems in our Senate race that we got 4 Senate districts. I know you guys are not worried about Senate, but in the 4 Senate districts, we've got a 41% overpopulation. Something's going to change there pretty drastically. But in the House districts, the 10 House districts we only have a 25.52% overpopulation. On an average, that's 2.5% per House district. I can see where some districts are going to change. Currently, districts 51, 53, 58, and 59 are overpopulated. But conversely, districts 54, 56, and 60 are underpopulated. Representative Freeman, yours is 1.46 underpopulated. So there is going to be some neighborhoods that change. As a Republican in this county, we feel very underrepresented, but I think your mission is to divide by population and not by politics. And that is my comment to you. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for your time.
Thank you. Mr. Himes?
Yes, Mr. Speaker. I have two folks listed here, Jackie Sims and Tom Savage. And if I don't know if both or one is going to speak, Miss Sims.
Welcome.
Thank you. My name is Jackie Sims. First, I would like to thank the House Redistricting Committee, Chairman Johnson, Vice Chair Marsh, and Attorney Himes, the counsel to the committee. I'm a resident of Nashville, and I am on the Redistricting Committee of the State Conference of the NAACP. I am here representing the Tennessee NAACP. Our state president, Gloria Jean Sweetlove, and Middle Tennessee Vice President, Elder Jimmy Garland. I should also add that the Tennessee State NAACP legal partner is the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights. The Tennessee NAACP has advocated for fair housing since Gomelian versus Lightfoot case in the early 1960s. I'm here today to make several appeals to you. First, it is important for the committee to support and vote for official hearings that allow for community groups to represent and submit redistricting plans, as well as to create a digital portal that allows community groups to submit plans and comments online. Public input is the singularly most important decision that this committee can make. It ensures that there is transparency in the redistricting process, instills public confidence, and promotes fairness. Having official hearings that allow for citizen and community input affirms that the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment will be honored. It also aligns with the principles of equal protection that were fundamental to Tennessee's Baker versus Carr decision in 1962. The Tennessee NAACP has other concerns that can be fully articulated if hearings are allowed. They include the importance of maintaining Davidson and Shelby counties as whole counties when it comes to congressional redistricting, and ensure fair redistricting for many rural communities. And I might add that most of the Tennessee NAACP units are located in rural counties and small towns. Finally, it is important to note that the redistricting process must comply with the 14th and 15th Amendments of the Constitution, as well as the Voting Rights Act. Although there have been some changes to the Voting Rights Act, parts of the law are still alive and applicable. Having public hearings that allow representative groups the ability to submit community-based plans, we believe is essential for democracy. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, Mr. Himes.
And finally, Mr. Speaker, Dick Williams.
Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, thank you, Mr. Speaker and committee members. Dick Williams, I'm a state chair of Common Cause Tennessee. We're a statewide and national organization that hopefully most of you are familiar with, or at least heard of, but we're interested in the areas of open government, transparency, voting rights, and obviously redistricting. Fortunately, by going last, I can say I agree with most of what people have said before me. Also, I think the guidelines that have been set out and state and federal law are getting at the technical things we need. The gap is obviously exactly how you put that together, and the importance of having enough information for enough citizens, your constituents, to be able to analyze it and have some kind of input. As was said, most of us probably won't be able to put together a statewide plan, but it's crucial that if you could get to the point of one or more draft plans in each of the categories that could be shared with the public early on. And again, as has been mentioned, perhaps at least regional, if not district-wide or smaller area presentations of those so that people can have input. Maybe they can only talk about, well, if you do this on my county, maybe you could do it here or there. And obviously, Mr. Himes and the staff and you all are going to have to figure that out. But we need to have it, again, some kind of draft plan or plans early enough for citizen groups and individuals to be able to at least comment on to their legislator. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you to all the speakers that came before our committee today. Representative Parkinson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Do we get an opportunity to ask the speakers questions?
Not at this time.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Leader Lamberth.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And to that point, to my friend from Shelby County, I know that this is just a first meeting. And Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to say, I really appreciate everything that Mr. Himes shared with us and all of the preliminary comments that we got from the public today. Mr. Chairman, I appreciate your leadership. I know this is going to be a lengthy process, but I specifically want to applaud our speaker for putting together a bipartisan committee. That's the first time that's ever happened in the history of Tennessee, to my knowledge. Somebody checked that for me, but I don't think that's ever occurred before. And I think that sets the right tone for this. Tennessee has grown. Our numbers have changed. We want to hear from you. Don't let the fact that it's a statewide plan that you need to submit intimidate you in any way. If there's an area that you're really focused on, submit that plan, but let us know that you really focus the most on one area, because that's what we want and what we need is both Republicans and Democrats to get this process right, is for everyone in Tennessee to be focused on this and to share with us your ideas on how we can fairly, legally, and properly redistribute our numbers. And I just want to say, from a legal standpoint, the reason we do that is look at these charts that are out there online. Look at where Tennessee's grown. If we didn't do this every 10 years, you would have some state house reps that would represent 10 or 20,000 people and others that would literally represent hundreds of thousands of people. It would not be fair. So it's a difficult process, but Mr. Chairman, to this committee, I really, really appreciate all the hard work I know we'll all go through. And thank you to every Tennessean that wants to get involved in this process for helping us and guiding us through this process.
Representative Wendell.
I just want to follow up on the leader's comments. I think we'd be remiss if we didn't recognize Doug Himes for his professionalism, his focus, his hard work, and the institutional knowledge he brings to the table for this process. He is a very important component of what we're trying to do, and he and his staff should be commended. And thank you, Doug, for your patience with us today and meeting with us and giving us some guidance. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And I'd like to thank the public, thank the members of the House that are in attendance with us today for showing up. And I'd really like to thank my assistant for the past 17 years, Linda Bowers. To all the audience, our future meetings, the dates will be posted on our website. Mr. Himes, would you inform the public in attendance and the public watching how to access our website?
Yes, Mr. Speaker. So I'm taking my glasses off, but on the for those of you in the room, the website address is at the bottom of the screen. For you, those of you that aren't in the room, if you go to the Tennessee General Assembly web site, you can go under House Committees, and at the bottom of the committee list is redistricting. Click on that, and that web page has the members of the committee, how to contact them, how to contact the chair, how to contact me. It also has a tab for for documents, which will include what the committee has gone over and approved today by the end of the day. And then finally, it has a tab for plans, which currently has a link to the current House districts and also has a link to the three pieces of legislation that will be the vehicles for the House, Senate, and congressional plans going forward. So that's going to the Tennessee General Assembly website, committees, House, and redistricting, and all the information will be posted there.
Thank you. And I'd like to commend the committee. We had every committee member show up today. So thank you very much. And if there's no further business, we will adjourn to the call of the chair.